All right, hello everybody. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mark Dalgleish, and I'm here tonight to talk to you about sketching in the browser. This is an article that I recently published as well. Normally I'm not game enough to ask, but out of curiosity, hands up if you read the article. It's all right if you didn't. That's actually really good. Cool. No, I'm glad. It'd be a bad thing if literally everyone put their hands up. Right? Yeah, sketching in the browser. I'm going to be talking kind of about my own experiences and some of the work I've been doing recently. Really, what I've been doing for the past year in particular is working in the space of design systems, which is really just kind of a rebranding, a natural evolution of the work that's been happening for a long time around living style guides, of course. But it's really just trying to take it to the next level and get more people involved. So I've been doing that at Seek. I've been at Seek now for quite a while, but specifically working in the area of design systems at Seek. Now, those of you who are working with design systems, it's probably not news to you at all that the benefits are quite clear. When you've got a living style guide in place, people generally seem to feel more productive. They'll readily tell me that all the time. The end products themselves are more consistent. We just had Kevin talking a lot about this as well. Like, once you've got multiple products all running off doing their own thing, having a design system in place is really critical to keeping that level of consistency across your products. But the thing that I really enjoy the most as someone, particularly as someone who appreciates development and design and the intersection of the two, is having a design system in place really drives clearer communication across that boundary between the two disciplines. It's really working full time to try and get a common language between these two groups, which I really enjoy seeing. But at the end of the day, there's kind of a core problem that exists in most design systems, which is, I'm sure this is not news to you, of course, that designers and developers, even with the design system in place, continue to work in radically different mediums. Developers obviously will be working in the end medium, whether that's the browser or native apps, whereas the designers will often be in a tool like Sketch or InVision or Photoshop or so on. As an industry, we've kind of largely been trained to just ignore this and work around it, but it is a real problem that we all feel. Now, so day by day, kind of what I'm working on is this as a product of the Seek Style Guide. This is open source if you want to go have a look. And this is where we surface all of the common components and lower level styles that we depend on. Ostensibly, it's a React UI component library, but there's some lower level, less stuff that we share in there as well. This wasn't the beginning of our journey, of course. The earliest stages of this journey came up from the design team with the work on the static style guide, which is really just a PDF, essentially, documenting all of the patterns and the rules around them. It's a great start, but obviously it only gets you so far. Within the design team at Seek, the design tool of choice was Sketch by far recently. So most designers tend to use this tool, although we obviously have a few alternatives now that are quite popular as well. This was kind of the next stage of that evolution at Seek, was the creation of a Sketch starter kit. So this was just a Sketch file with a bunch of symbols, common things that people would often use as the starting point of a new design. So if you're a designer at Seek, back when this was being used, you would open this, take a copy of this file, open it up, and that was your starting point, really. It didn't give you a whole lot, but it gave you a lot more than nothing, right? It was a really good starting point. It was really popular with the designers. This actually is open source as well, funnily enough. It's still up on GitHub. One of the next evolutions that the design team at Seek experimented with was Craft. So Craft is a suite of plugins from InVision for Sketch. So there's a bunch of different ones, but the most notable one for the purposes of this talk is the library plugin. So with Sketch, typically out of the box, the symbols are the kind of the reusable elements within your document, and those symbols were scoped to the document itself. If you're in the context of a team where you've got a common set of symbols that you want to share, there wasn't really any built-in mechanism for doing that. And that's what this library plugin aimed to do. So this is not Seek related, but this is an example of building a native app with a common set of components from a shared library. So you'll see there that in the library panel that's part of Craft's library plugin, you've got the shared section there. So you've still got your own local symbols that you can create and manipulate, but you've also got the common ones that you can share with your team. So this is something that we started using internally at Seek. But as you might imagine, it became quickly apparent for the design team that it takes a lot of work to maintain something like this. The easy bit, in some ways, the easy bit is starting, but the hard part is keeping up with an ever-evolving set of products that have their own patterns that change, with any given commit to any given code base. Core patterns could be changing every day, and so. This was a real challenge, and the further we moved into responsive design, this problem multiplied. It's really hard to keep a responsive set of symbols in sync with a responsive code base. It was really, really tough. So staying in sync with production was like the biggest problem with this library. Again, it was better than what we had before, certainly better than nothing, but it was a lot of work, and because no one really was dedicated to this work, that made it even worse. It was really, really tough for us to maintain. So in the meantime, what was happening at Seek, this was a few years ago now, we were starting our first React code base. And if you've worked with React before, you'll definitely know that React kind of goes all in on components. Unlike solutions before it, it's really all about components with React. And what's great about it is it naturally leads you towards living style guides and design systems. And I actually think that React is probably one of the biggest reasons why we've seen this resurgence lately. So for us, from the humble beginnings of inside of a folder in our first React code base, sprung up our first legitimate living style guide. We were actually really lucky at Seek in that we had to build out a lot of responsive products really quickly, and other teams copied and pasted our code base and altered it for their needs. And as part of that copying and pasting, they actually copied and pasted the early version of this style guide that was just a folder inside of our project. So yeah, we were really lucky in that we avoided one of the biggest problems with design systems, which is how do you actually sell it and get multiple teams on board? We kind of had that from day one. We were very, very lucky. So we basically went to those teams and we said, you can just delete that folder, point to this central repository or NPM package, and we were good to go. So that was really great for us. So for us, what this is all about syncing design and code, both in terms of assets, but also in terms of language, in terms of the teams themselves, getting them really getting them on the same page. It was at this point that a project came along that really blew us away. I'm sure many of you have heard of it before. It's a project from Airbnb called React Sketchapp. So in the introductory blog post about it from John Gold, who works at Airbnb, he said, in Sketch we use symbols and overrides. In React we use components and properties. The concepts are so similar that it seemed silly not to unify them. So what that looked like in practice, it was really, really incredible. So this is an animation that John Gold shared on Twitter at some point of kind of what it looks like in practice for them. So there on the left side so this is within Sketch. They're opening up kind of options for React components that are in their living style guide. They're providing those options and on the fly generating new instances of these symbols. And once they're ready, they can drag them and drop them into the artboard. First of all, cutting out a whole bunch of work. Obviously, this would be great even if it wasn't coming from the code. But you add on top of the fact that this is coming from the real source of truth in their system, which is the same code that runs in production, both on their website and in their native apps, which is really, really amazing. To me, this is what really kicked off a whole new generation of thinking about what's possible in the space of design systems, now that we have components as a source of truth in living, breathing code. Unfortunately for us, this came with a few requirements. Of course, coming from Airbnb, it's very much kind of tied to their worldview. It's a worldview I'm jealous of, right? But we have our own reality at Seek. So the first requirement is that you had to use React. Obviously, it's in the title. For us, that wasn't a problem. But for some of you in the audience, of course, that already might be a deal breaker. You now can't use it with your stack. But for us, that was OK. The second requirement is that you had to write your styles in JavaScript. And that's because basically the way React Sketchup works is it's kind of like working with React Native. So if you've ever looked at React Native or used React Native, React Native tries to simulate a browser environment in a native app. And it does that by providing a subset of CSS to you, including Flexbox. But for that to work, you don't have the full power of CSS. You don't have raw style sheets like you do in a browser. You have to use the special subset within JavaScript that they provide. We don't do that at Seek, at least not yet. We're not against CSS and JS, but our stack is built on CSS modules, and we weren't keen to change anytime soon. The last requirement is that you had to build everything with cross-platform primitives section. That's a typo, with cross-platform primitives. So what that meant was that you couldn't have components that relied on divs and spans and so on. You had to boil down to some common layer that could then target native apps and web apps. Another way of framing this is if in your code base you're deliberately trying to build components for both React Web and React Native, you're fine. If you had picked just React Web, you're suddenly going to run into an issue with this, trying to go down this path. So we were, of course, quite sad about this, because as much as we thought this was a great idea and we'd love to do it, it actually required some fundamental changes to our stack that we weren't quite prepared to jump into. Again, it's not that we were against any of these decisions, but the payoff didn't really seem like enough versus the amount of work it would take. So turns out, luckily, that we were not the only ones in this position. So Conrad Zweinel from Brainly, they open sourced this project called HTML Sketchapp, and in the README they said we were unable to quickly work around these limitations, so we created HTML Sketchapp. So this is a picture from the README of what HTML Sketchapp, showing you what HTML Sketchapp looks like. And it's really taking a radically different approach than what React Sketchapp did. So here you can see it's rendering a bunch of content that may be familiar to you. So you can see there that there's a Twitter page being rendered into Sketch. There's a Stack Overflow page there, DuckDuckGo as well. So all these things, these are just generic web pages, not built with any particular React-centric tech stack or anything like that, just generic web content, and here it is being rendered into Sketch. Pretty amazing stuff. So opposite to our disappointment with React Sketchup, as much as we liked that project, this one completely blew us away, because suddenly the doors were wide open. We had something that could work with whatever ends up in the browser, we could put into Sketch in theory. So the first question you might be asking, as we certainly did, is how does this thing work? Like, what's going on here? The first part of understanding what's happening here is to understand what's happened with with Sketch's file format. And this is, relatively speaking, a new thing for Sketch. It wasn't like this in the beginning, but they now have an open file format. And what that means is that you can go ahead and rename any Sketch file to .zip, and you can actually unpack it and have a look at what's inside of it. So rather than being a binary inside of there, you've actually got human-readable JSON files and images. You can go ahead and open those. And if you look at those JSON files, it looks something like this. So it looks a bit noisy, but when you actually drill in, it's not that complicated. It's a bunch of sort of nested classes. So you can see there's a class of a page, there's a class of a rect. There's only a small handful of these, and they have some pretty understandable properties, width and height and so on. Obviously, you get a bit further down, there's some very Sketch-specific concepts, but more or less, it's quite a straightforward format. And so what HTML Sketchup does is it aims to be kind of a layer on top of this format. So HTML Sketchup is a JavaScript library and a corresponding Sketch plugin for you to be able to generate these valid Sketch files. So it's achieved with these sort of two parts. So the first is HTML to a Sketch, and the second part is a Sketch to Sketch. Now the first thing you might be wondering, of course, here is what is a Sketch? And that's sort of a concept that HTML Sketchup has introduced, which really is what they call almost Sketch. And that's unfortunately because of some current limitations, hopefully short term, with the Sketch file format. The two issues that they ran into, first one is an issue with the Sketch file format itself, which is that text styling currently is binary blobs. They take instances of native Mac classes and serialize them in a way that if you're not on a Mac and you're not inside of Sketch, like, you can't generate this. So that's a real challenge if you're trying to solve this problem. The other one is more sort of a browser quirk issue in the sense that it encodes all the images in the page into this JSON, but the problem is because of cross-origin restrictions, sometimes you actually don't have access to the image because it's on another domain. So that's just another slight workaround they've had to put in there. They basically put, from what I understand, they put like a placeholder, like the URL for the image in the JSON, and then the Sketch plugin, because it has, it's not restricted by cause, it can go ahead and pull that image down and put it into the document. So that's where the first part comes in, of course, is HTML to a sketch. That's where most of the work happens, of course. So HTML to a sketch provides some high-level classes. This isn't all of them, but these are the main ones. So you can create documents and pages. You can attach pages to documents. You can create text elements and attach them to pages and so on. The big one, of course, is that you can create symbols. Symbols being the reusable elements in a living library of Sketch, well, symbols. And then the last one that really takes it to the next level, of course, is the node to sketch layers function, which can take a DOM element and turn it into an array of sketch layers. So when you put all these together, you can do some pretty amazing things. I won't dig too much into this. This is more just in terms of showing you the concepts. So this is kind of what it looks like to turn a node into an array of layers, and then for each of those layers, you can add them to an instance of a symbol. So you might have created a symbol, grab a node from the browser, turn it into layers, add them to the symbol. So now you've got your symbol as easily as that. You can create a new page, and then for all of the symbols you've created, like we saw on the previous slide, you can then add those symbols to your page. You can turn that page to JSON, of course. And at the end of it, if you run through this process, you end up with these two different files by convention. Of course, you're free to name them whatever you want, but in the examples they provide in HTML Sketchapp's documentation, they've got a document.asketch.json and a page.asketch.json. Now, getting these is a little bit of there's a bit of a tricky process involved. Luckily, they actually provide an example of this, which made it quite relatively straightforward to hook up, but there's a few steps. The first is you need to compile a script to run in the browser which contains HTML Sketchapp, but also all of the logic for extracting the symbols and styles from your page, which of course your page might be different from others. Then you need to start up, well, in our case we had to start up a static web server. You might have an existing web server you point to instead. We open Puppeteer, which is a headless Chrome, and we point that at the correct URL. We then inject the script that we compiled at the start with HTML Sketchapp and all the logic for pulling out the symbols. We inject that into the Puppeteer instance. We then call the functions that we injected in turn, so we capture the symbols and all the styles. In our case, because we have a responsive style guide, we actually resize the browser window and repeat this process a couple of times. Once all that's finished, we have the instances of the document and the page. We're ready to output the JSON and put them onto disk. And then we shut down our static web server, and then finally we shut down Puppeteer. So at a high level, it's kind of a simple thing we're doing. It's basically reaching into a page and pulling out some styles, putting them on disk. But you can see there's a few sort of steps that we had to run through. And all of the code for coordinating this was inside of our style guide. So naturally, once we'd hooked all of this up, we started to wonder, like, particularly as other parts of the business that were on different tech stacks were interested in the same techniques, we started to think, how can we make this easier for someone else to come along and not have to bang their head against the same walls we did? Can we wrap this up into a simple script? And of course, that's what we did. So out of this came our addition to this ecosystem, which is an open source command line tool called HTML Sketchapp CLI. And what it does is it allows you to kind of boil down to just some core config to just declaratively tell the tool the key bits of information it needs to work, and it'll handle the rest. So in this case, this is literally the config for Seek's style guide. All we have to do is say we want to serve our style guide website out of docs/dist. The URL that we want to scrape everything from is on a special page called Sketch Exports. We want to output to a directory called dist/asketch. And then here are the viewports that we want to provide desktop, mobile plus mobile, and all of these get appended to the names of all the symbols. So every single symbol will have a desktop version, a mobile plus version, a mobile version. All the other steps that we covered before, they're all taken care of for you, so it's nice and simple. So obviously I've gone through a lot of theory and a lot of background. What's great about this format is I get to kind of show you what the actual project looks like and dig into the code. I do want to stress too, because this is live and I'm just going to kind of go through the actual work that we've been doing. If at any point you've got a question or something you feel like you want me to dig into further, just chuck your hand up, and if I see you, I'll try and get to it. So this is our style guide here. This is the website. Now, as you'd expect from a typical site of this nature, we've got all of our components listed, and you can click into them and see what the options are, show help text, secondary labels, and so on. It's the usual thing. But what we've got sort of hidden in there is an extra route, which you saw in our config before, called sketch-exports. Yeah. So if you drill into this page, what we've basically done is we've pulled in everything that we want to export to Sketch. We pull it into one page to make it nice and easy to extract everything. So if you scroll down this page, you can see right up the top we've got our text styles, all of our typography defined there. We've got our color palette. This also is being pulled in live from our less files. So if you go into our less files that define all of our color variables, they'll immediately show up in this grid of colors. And then finally, the most useful part of this system, of course, is the symbols. So you've got the buttons here, all the variations, button groups, checkboxes, label, drop-down, slide toggles, text as well, and so on, text area. And then we've got header and footer in different countries, logged in, logged out. And again, all of this is coming from the real code that's running in production, just being rendered over and over again. Now, the way this kind of works in practice is, so we've got I'll show you the Sketch exports page. So essentially what we do is we're using Webpack, and we've got a special plugin for Webpack that allows us to import using this glob style. So we're basically saying, reach back into our React component folder and pull in any file ending in .sketch.js. So that means that within each component folder, we can just simply add a .sketch.js file and expose either some text styles, some block symbols in our case being ones that go all the way to the edge of the browser window, which are quite rare. Then we've got symbols, which are the ones that just sit in the middle. We've also got colors as well that come in from our theme folder. And so what this means is that without us having to go into some big long list of everything we want to expose, it's just as easy as adding a file inside of a folder. And these get rendered over and over again with the right hooks to get scraped. So for example, colors, they have this data attribute, data sketch color, that has the value of the color. We also have symbols here where data sketch symbol has the name of the symbol. So that makes it easy for us to scrape everything from the page and know what it's called in order to put it into Sketch. So if I go back up to the top, you'll see what we were doing here is pulling in this special file format that we've created inside of this project. So I'm gonna show you kind of a basic one of those. The canonical, of course, always being button. So I'll go look at button.sketch.js. And that's as simple as that, really. Like what it's doing is it's exporting symbols, and the key is the name of the symbol, and the value is the React element that we want to render to the page. Now again, I want to stress that HTML Sketchapp and HTML Sketchapp CLI themselves don't care whether it's React or not. This is only React because that's what we happen to be using. This could just as easily be plain HTML templates. Doesn't really matter. So these buttons are all defined in one central place. If someone wants to add a new button to the page, all they got to do is just remember to add the new button to the list of Sketch exports. But again, if they make a change to one of these existing buttons, those changes will automatically flow through to Sketch with the next build. So it makes it a really good development flow. It means that as people work on the code base, these Sketch symbols continue to stay up to date. Now, every time we run a build, all of our standard build process runs, including unit tests and linting and everything else. But now, right at the end, what it does with the final website is it builds the sketch JSON files as well. Obviously, that's quite a long turnaround if you're trying to develop on it. So we also have a script that I can run here over on the right of what is it? HTML Sketchapp dev. So basically what this command does, this is as you're developing, it's going to pull the symbols from the dev server that I've got running on the left there. So that's what's running my local server. Yeah, so if you're deliberately iterating on Sketch symbols and testing them inside of Sketch, this is the command that developer will run. So it was as quick as that. So it really only took a few seconds. It's run HTML Sketchapp, the CLI tool, and it's pointed at our config file that you saw earlier. And out the other end has come these asketch JSON files. So now if I jump over to Sketch, I've got a blank Sketch document. I've got my plugin here that I talked about earlier from almost Sketch to Sketch. Unfortunately, this is the one manual step in this process. It really bugs me that it's manual. But relatively, compared to what we did before, this is really, really automated. I click from almost Sketch to Sketch. And if I go over to, where am I? So if I go to Projects, 6 Style Guide, Dist, asketch, there are my two JSON files there, document and page. I just highlight those two and click choose, wait probably about 2 seconds, 3, 4, and it's done. So it's pulled in those JSON files, it's applied those text styles that we talked about earlier. In our case, we didn't have any issues with cross-domain images, so they're fine. And it's done. So I can actually save this now as a Sketch library. What I'll show you quickly is, if you're wanting to test as a developer, if you've made a change or a designer pairing with a developer, and you want to quickly check that everything's worked out the way you expect, you can create a new page here, and then local to this document, we can pull in the symbols menu. So these symbols are local to this document we've just created. And you can see we've got button group, button, checkbox, all of these that we've exposed in the style guide. And so if we want, say, a button group, and we want a pink and a transparent, for each of these we've got a desktop, as we saw before, desktop, mobile, mobile plus. So what's really cool is it means that if we sort of go back a bit and I want to create a very basic Seek page, I won't go into too much detail, but if I want to do a basic Seek page on mobile, I can go header, Australia, unauthenticated, mobile, and there's our header. I'm going to use Sketch Run Editor just to save a bit of time. So I can type footer mobile. Yep. And it lines it up like that. I can put in text hero mobile. And whoops. This is the one thing that's annoying about Sketch. This is Sketch's fault. Even though we can actually, and we can and we do programmatically generate text styles for Sketch, at the moment Sketch libraries, they don't expose text styles from the library, they only expose symbols. And so so typically with text styles, you can open this menu and go style text. And well, so see how good this looks? This is really great. This is actually in the context of the document. I can say like hero, and I can and desktop, mobile, mobile plus. I can actually see kind of what it looks like, and I can pull in mobile, and I can click and start, typing hello, Melb CSS, which is a really great user experience. Unfortunately, that's not what consumers of the Sketch library have to go through. They have to pull in a symbol, which they then have to. Well, they can override the text. Sometimes this works. So what's really neat about the way HTML Sketchapp works is by default, anytime there's a text node somewhere in the symbol, it actually exposes it as an override where the label is the text. So here you can see hero text. I can type in there hello Melb CSS, and this probably will work. Not quite. All right. So I'll detach from symbol, and there we go. So it's fixed. It's a little awkward. Hopefully they'll fix that at some point. But relatively speaking, that's pretty good. Of course, I can go further and I can put in, a text field, mobile, like that, and so on. So that's pretty powerful. Button group. like that. So that's pretty powerful. And the designers have obviously, as you might imagine, responded quite favorably to this. This is pretty cool stuff. Are there any questions about that? I've kind of flown through a lot of how it hangs together. Yep.
How would you deal in this sort of view here with like baselines and space?
So if you didn't hear the question, that it was in this sort of context, how do you deal with baselines, making sure everything's kind of laid out correctly? Yeah, well, I think this cuts to the core of kind of the challenge of having these two mediums, because when you're inside of Sketch, obviously I can do that, but I actually can't really do that so easily in the browser for good reason. It's very easy to break the rules inside of Sketch or even not be aware of the rules at all. Yeah. I might touch on that a bit later, sort of the solution to that problem as I see it anyway. You can obviously have some kind of guidelines within Sketch to deal with that. Another thing that we've thought about doing is to provide a few more like composite components for common patterns that will give you the padding around things. So if you want to create a card with a heading and a subheading and blah, 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 like a standard set of things, we could potentially have a symbol for that, but there's obviously a limit to how far you can go with that. Yeah, jump back to the talk here. Yeah, so what I'll quickly say about this as well is, so this is open source, this tool. And if this is something you're interested in, I highly recommend you check out this tool, give it a try, see what you think. Send us pull requests if there's anything wrong. Love to kind of build this up to be a tool that anyone can use. There's been a few people online that have tried this out and have found it really useful, so hopefully that's true of you as well. So the big question, I guess, is where to from here, because it's worth pointing out that this is, and definitely related to the last question, this is definitely not the end point for the industry. If anything, this is just the start of a whole new way of thinking. Luckily, there's a whole bunch of people already trying to work in this space. Really trying to break down the walls between dev and design and make it so that instead of trying to get our design tools to imitate the target platform, we should instead have design tools that truly embrace the platform and ideally are even built on top of the platform itself. So you've got tools like Compositor and Interplay, Alva, Haiku, Webflow, and UXPen has a new product on the way. These are all, what's interesting about these tools is that they all have a very different spin. It's really not clear which approach is going to win out, which one's going to catch on. It's a really burgeoning space. So if it's something that you're interested in, definitely check out the blog post that I wrote that goes along with it, which provides links to all of these. Have a look and see what works for you. What's interesting too is some of these resonate more with devs, some of them resonate more with designers. So I'm really interested to see what happens with these. But the core problem that people are trying to solve is trying to make it so that when designers and developers are working for the web, particularly in this case, that we're actually working in the same medium, that work that one side produces can be used by the other directly and vice versa, rather than working with static artifacts and having to rebuild things. And if you get a design from a designer and you build it out to production quality, that work should then flow into the next round of design just as easily. But it's worth pointing out that even though it's a burgeoning space and there's a lot of new tools coming out and they're all doing different things, I really think there's never been a better time to get started. And there's a lot of people working in the space, ourselves included, to try and make this as easy as possible to become the norm. And I think it's going to take people who are really on the edge of this stuff, people that are in this room, of course, really trying to push the status quo forward and really influence the industry. So hopefully you'll join me in that. And I'm really interested to see where our industry takes this kind of work. That's it for me. Thank you very much.